The photograph landed face up on the hospital floor, and for 3 full seconds nobody in the hallway breathed. A woman in a torn cream dress stared at a man who was not supposed to recognize her. A stranger with a crooked gray beard stood frozen beside an elevator, watching his whole life rearrange itself around a single word someone had just said out loud. Nobody moved to pick the photograph up. Nobody wanted to be the one who confirmed what it showed. 9 days earlier. I had never felt real dirt under my fingernails before. Not the kind that settles into the creases of your knuckles and stays there. The kind that makes a stranger's eyes slide past you before your shadow can even reach theirs. I stood behind a shuttered auto parts store 2 blocks from the Cherry Creek shopping center, studying my reflection in a side mirror somebody had left cracked and unclaimed. The man staring back had hollow cheeks, a beard glued on in patches, a canvas coat 3 sizes too big, and boots with the left sole peeled halfway off. Nobody would know that face. Not the face on the cover of Colorado Business Monthly. Not the groom whose engagement had been photographed at 4 separate galas. Not the only son of Marcus Reyes, founder of Reyes Meridian Holdings. Not the fiancé of Camille Ford. I rubbed a smear of ash beneath my eyes and dropped my chin. The wedding was 9 days away. 9 days before 300 people would fill the Brown Palace ballroom to watch Camille promise to love me for better or worse. And lately I could not stop wondering whether she understood what worse actually meant. A black SUV eased into the alley behind me. Dale, the only person who knew what I was doing today, stepped out with his jaw tight. "This is a bad idea, Nathaniel." "It's clarity," I said, cinching the rope around the torn duffel on my shoulder. "Clarity can ruin a man just as fast as a lie can." He looked at the coat, then at me, like he was deciding whether to physically stop this. He didn't. 3 weeks earlier, at our engagement dinner, I had walked past the terrace doors holding 2 glasses of champagne and heard laughter that wasn't cruel, that would have been easier to dismiss. It was soft, expensive laughter, the kind rich rooms produce without meaning to. One of Camille's friends had said, half joking, "Imagine if Nathaniel lost it all tomorrow." There had been a pause, barely half a second, before Camille answered. "Nathaniel's not the kind of man who loses everything." Everyone laughed. I laughed too, from the hallway, holding 2 glasses that suddenly felt very heavy. She hadn't said I'd still love him. She hadn't said money doesn't change anything. She'd said I wasn't the kind of man who loses. Since that night, every smile of hers had started to feel like a question I couldn't answer, and every kiss had started to feel like evidence I wasn't sure I trusted. By 10 that morning, I was sitting outside the mall's east entrance with a paper cup in my hand, learning what the world decided I was worth. A teenage boy dropped 2 quarters without looking down. A mother pulled her daughter's hand tighter as they passed. 2 men in tailored suits stepped around me the way you step around a puddle. An old man in a flannel jacket set a sandwich by my shoe without a word, then said, "Keep breathing, son," like he knew something about mornings like this one. It hit harder than it should have. At noon, I made my way toward the boutique row where Camille often met her wedding planner, my pulse hammering so hard I nearly aborted the whole test. Then I saw her. She stepped out of a white car in a cream dress, hair pinned back, the ring catching the light. Beside her, Priya, her maid of honor, was talking fast, scrolling on her phone without looking up. Camille laughed at something Priya said, and then the laugh faded as her eyes moved across the sidewalk, across the crowd, across me. I dropped my head and gripped the cup until my fingers ached. Her footsteps slowed. Priya said, "Camille, we're late. Don't stop." But Camille had already stopped. Her shadow fell over my ruined boots for one long breath before either of us moved. Then her voice came, soft, from above me. "Sir, are you hungry?" I lifted my face just enough for the woman I loved to look directly into the eyes of a man she didn't know. Her gaze searched mine. Not the way she searched people she cared about, just carefully enough to decide whether I was dangerous, desperate, or invisible. My throat closed. I had rehearsed this moment for days, imagining myself calm, clinical, a man running a quiet experiment with perfect emotional distance. Imagination lies. Because when Camille Ford stood over me with sunlight caught in her hair and something careful pulling at her mouth, all I wanted was to stand up, tear off the fake beard, and apologize for ever doubting her. Priya stepped closer, lowering her voice. Camille, we cannot start this today. Camille didn't move. The cup shook in my hand. Yes, I rasped, forcing my voice into something older and broken. I haven't eaten since yesterday. The lie scraped my tongue on the way out. Something shifted across her face, quick and private. She opened her purse. Priya sighed loudly. There are organizations for this. You cannot personally save every man on the sidewalk. Camille ignored her and pulled out a folded bill. $100 too much for a stranger, too little to prove love. She crouched slightly, then stopped. Her eyes had landed on my hands. I had forgotten the scar. A thin white line across my right thumb from a broken glass. The night I proposed to her, we'd laughed about it in the ER while she cried and called me reckless. I curled my fingers too late. Camille's gaze lingered. My heart stopped moving entirely. Your hand, she said quietly. Old cut, I muttered, tucking it beneath the coat. She stayed still. Behind her, traffic kept moving. A bus hissed somewhere near the crosswalk, and the entire world continued on, unaware that my future was balancing on one pale scar. Priya pulled at her elbow. The planner is waiting. Camille set the bill in my cup, not tossed, placed, like my dignity mattered to her. Please get something warm, she said, not intimate, not suspicious. Guarded, gentle, careful. Thank you, I whispered. She turned to leave, and relief and disappointment crashed into each other somewhere behind my ribs. Then a gust of wind caught the edge of my coat, exposing the tailored lining I'd failed to tear properly. Priya saw it first. Her eyes narrowed. Wait. Camille stopped. Priya stepped closer, studying me with the sharp suspicion of a woman who trusted deception more than she trusted poverty. That coat, she said. Where'd you get that? Found it in an alley, I muttered, not looking up. She gave a short laugh. Of course you did. Camille glanced at her. Priya, I'm serious. Priya crossed her arms. He's running something. Look at the shoes, ruined. But that coat had money in it once. Those words landed harder than I expected, not because of the accusation, but because I had built this lie myself and still felt wounded when someone doubted the man I was pretending to be. Camille's jaw tightened. Even if he is, she said quietly, hunger is still hunger. Priya looked stunned. You're unbelievable. Camille turned back to me, and for one dangerous second I thought she might recognize the silence behind my eyes, the way I hold pain there. The one thing no fake beard could hide. Instead, she reached into her purse again and pulled out a small white card. Not cash, an address. I volunteer here sometimes, she said. They serve lunch at 1. Tell them Camille sent you. Priya's face went hard. I stared at the card. Camille volunteered at a shelter. She'd never told me. Not once. In 2 years of candlelit dinners, charity galas, weekend trips, wedding planning, family breakfasts, and late-night confessions. Never once. My mind grabbed the question like a weapon. Maybe it was performance, staged because Priya was watching. Maybe she liked secret charity because it made her feel noble in private. Or maybe, and this thought frightened me more than the others, she had kept something pure hidden from the world I'd raised her into. Thank you, I said again. She nodded, and Priya pulled her toward the glass doors of the boutique. I stayed on the pavement long after she was gone, the bill sitting in my cup, the card trembling in my palm, and for the first time since deciding on this test, I felt afraid of the answer. I had expected cruelty. Cruelty would have been simple. It would have let me walk away with clean anger. Compassion complicated everything. By late afternoon, the sky had gone the color of wet concrete. The shopping district turned impatient. A courier cursed the traffic. A man in a red tie told me to get a job without slowing his stride. Each reaction taught me something ugly about a world I had been protected from my whole life. When you have money, people study your face to learn how to please you. When you look poor, they study your face to learn how fast they can look away. At 4:30, Dale's SUV idled across the street, waiting for the signal we'd agreed on. If I touched my left ear twice, he'd step in. I didn't, because Camille wasn't finished surprising me yet. Around 5, she came out of the boutique alone. No Priya, no planner. Just Camille, holding a white folder against her chest, scanning the sidewalk not for Nathaniel, for me, the man in the coat. "You're still here," she said. I let my shoulders slump, nowhere else to go. She hesitated, then lowered herself onto the pavement beside me in her cream dress. My fiancé, who was supposed to be tasting wedding cake, sat down next to a filthy stranger while shoppers stared. My chest tightened so fast I nearly forgot how to breathe. "People are looking," I said. "I know," she answered, watching the traffic. "I mind that looking is easier for them than helping." It was such a Camille sentence and such a stranger's sentence at once that my doubt actually stumbled. I glanced at her through the fringe of the wig. "Your friend doesn't like me. Priya doesn't like many things she can't control. Like beggars? Like reminders," Camille said, "of what she thinks comfort is supposed to protect her from." A memory surfaced, unbidden. The first night I'd met Camille, at a hospital fundraiser, she hadn't been wearing diamonds, a plain navy dress, standing near the exit while donors congratulated each other over champagne. I'd mistaken her for another polished society woman until she slipped out of the ballroom and sat on the floor with an elderly janitor whose ankle had swollen. She'd taken off her own heels and waited beside that woman until help came. That was the person I fell in love with. So why had one careless sentence at an engagement dinner been enough to poison 2 years of evidence? Because love isn't always defeated by betrayal. Sometimes it's defeated by fear wearing the mask of wisdom. "What's your name?" she asked. The first name that came to me was my father's. "Walter," I said. Her eyes softened in a way I didn't expect. That was my father's name. I knew that, of course, her father had died when she was 17, and she almost never spoke of him. But when she did, her voice changed. Like grief still lived somewhere under her tongue. "Was he a kind man?" I asked. "He tried to be," she said. Tried, not was. Another crack in the wall before I could ask anything more. Her phone rang. The name on the screen flashed before she turned it face down. "Mother?" She stood quickly. "Hi, Mom." I kept my head lowered, listening with everything I had. "Yes, I saw the revised guest list." A pause. "No, we are not removing the shelter choir." The shelter choir. My fingers tightened around the cup. "Because I invited them," Camille said, her voice low but hard as stone. "Because they matter to me." Another pause, longer this time, her face tightening with something old and tired. "No, Mom. Nathaniel doesn't need to approve every human being who walks into that ballroom." I flinched. She turned away, but I heard the rest. "I don't care what Priya said. I'm not ashamed of them." The call ended. Camille stood very still, then wiped under one eye before facing me again. I looked away before she could catch me watching. "I'm sorry," she said. "For what?" "For how people talk when they think someone doesn't belong." The words landed quietly and found a room inside me I'd kept locked for years. My father had raised me among men who measured worth in land, companies, and photographed generosity. But my mother, before she died, used to tell me the only time money tells the truth is when it leaves your hand. I had forgotten that, or maybe buried it, because wealth rewards forgetting. Camille looked at the shelter card still in my palm. "You didn't go?" "No. Why?" The honest answer almost surfaced because I was waiting for you, but instead I said, "Maybe I didn't believe you." She nodded slowly. Like that didn't offend her at all. "I understand. People promise help all the time. It doesn't cost them anything to sound kind." Thunder rolled somewhere far off. She checked the time, and I watched a decision land on her face before she spoke it. "Come with me." My heart struck against my ribs. "Where?" "The shelter." I stared at her. This was not part of the plan. The plan had been simple. Sit outside the places she visited, see whether she ignored a stranger or helped one, gather enough evidence to silence the doubt. Following her meant walking into a world she'd hidden from me, A world where the test could turn around and judge me instead. I can't, I said. Her brows drew together. Why not? I don't go places with strangers. A faint smile touched her mouth. Good. That means you still have some sense left. She opened the folder and drew out a sealed paper bag I hadn't noticed. I bought this for you. Inside was a real meal, not a hurried leftover roasted chicken, rice, warm bread, a bottle of water, the kind of food she knew I loved. I thought you might refuse the shelter, she said. Some people do. Why would they? Because help can feel like surrender. She said it like someone who already knew, before I could ask what she meant. A black sedan cut sharply to the curb. The window came down, and Camille's mother, Meredith Ford, stared out with the kind of beauty that had long since forgotten how to be warm. Camille. The air changed. Camille stood but didn't step away from me. Mom. Meredith's eyes moved over me with open disgust. Get in the car. I'll come later. You'll come now. Meredith glanced toward the boutique. Priya called me. She said you were sitting on the ground with a vagrant. The word landed harder on Camille than it landed on me. He's a man, she said. He's a problem. He's hungry. He is not your responsibility. Camille's face tightened, but her voice stayed level. That sentence is exactly why I invited the shelter choir. Meredith's mouth went still. I looked between them, realizing I had stepped into a war that had nothing to do with today. Something buried far deeper. Do not embarrass this family 9 days before your wedding, Meredith said. Camille laughed once, without any humor in it. This family has survived worse embarrassment than kindness. A few phones had already come out around us. The engagement of Nathaniel Reyes and Camille Ford was public enough to feed a gossip column, and one video of Camille arguing with her mother beside a homeless man could be a headline by midnight. Camille had every practical reason to walk away, every social reason, every wealthy reason. Instead, she turned back to me and set the food bag beside my cup, her voice dropping. I'm sorry, Walter. I have to go. Walter, the false name, burned worse than I expected. I wanted to tell her she owed me nothing. I wanted to tell her she'd already given more than I deserved. But Meredith was watching, and I still didn't know whether Camille's compassion was courage or performance. Then she did something that cracked the clean lines of my entire test wide open. She slipped the engagement ring off her finger. My lungs emptied. She held it in her palm for one long moment, staring at it like it had suddenly gained weight. Camille, what are you doing? Meredith gasped. Camille looked at her mother. If this ring means I can't sit beside a hungry man without becoming an embarrassment, then maybe everyone has misunderstood what I'm about to promise. She slipped it into her purse, not throwing it away, not rejecting me, just removing it from an argument, protecting it from being used as a leash. Meredith's face went pale with fury. Get in the car. Camille looked at me one last time, something unreadable moving through her eyes. Grief, maybe, older than either of us. Then she stepped into the sedan, and it pulled away into the traffic. I sat frozen on the pavement, a warm meal beside me, $100 bill in my cup, a shelter card trembling in my palm. Dale crossed the street. Sir, we should stop. I looked at the empty space where Camille had stood, and for the first time since deciding on this whole reckless test, I understood something terrifying. I had disguised myself to learn the truth about her character. But Camille had just revealed something about mine because she had looked at a beggar and seen a man. And I had looked at the woman I loved and seen a suspect. The first drops of rain began to fall. Dale held out an umbrella. I pushed myself to my feet before he could cover me. Follow her car, I said. His eyes widened. Nathaniel, this is getting dangerous. I looked down at my ruined boots, my dirty hands, the fake life I had built to judge the real one she'd been living. I know. Across the street, the boutique doors opened again. Priya rushed out, phone pressed to her ear, speaking fast. She looked in the direction Camille's car had gone, then turned and found me on the sidewalk. Our eyes met. Something flickered across her face recognition, not of my face, of the lie itself. Her mouth parted slowly, and then she lifted the phone higher, her voice clear enough to cut through the rain. Meredith, We have a much bigger problem. I think Nathaniel is the beggar. Rain hammered the windshield as Dale eased the SUV into traffic, keeping 3 cars between us and the black sedan carrying Camille and her mother. I stayed low in the back seat, still in the disguise. The fake beard itched. The damp coat clung to my skin. Neither bothered me nearly as much as the sentence still echoing through my head because she had looked at a beggar and seen a man. Dale glanced at me through the mirror. "Sir." I didn't answer. "I've worked for your family for 14 years. I've watched billion-dollar negotiations that were less dangerous than what you're doing right now." I looked through the rain-streaked window. "Keep driving." He sighed. "I hope you're testing the right person." 20 minutes later, the sedan stopped outside an aging brick building wedged between a pharmacy and a shuttered church. No cameras, no valet, just a faded sign reading Willowbrook Family Center, the same address on the card in my pocket. My pulse quickened. Meredith stepped out first, dressed with the elegance of someone who expected the world to rearrange itself around her. Camille followed, and even from a distance I could tell the argument wasn't finished. Meredith spoke sharply. Camille answered calmly. Then, unexpectedly, Meredith returned to the car alone, clearly frustrated, and the sedan pulled away. Camille wiped rain from her face, picked up 2 cardboard boxes from the entrance, and disappeared inside. Dale frowned. What if this was just about getting away from her mother? He didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. Camille hadn't come here to make a point. She'd come because she meant to be here. I opened the door. Dale grabbed my sleeve. "Sir, what if she recognizes you?" "She won't. And if someone else does—" I hesitated. He had a point. My face had been printed in enough business magazines. But the disguise had already fooled Camille and a few hundred strangers. It could fool a few more. "I'm going in." The smell hit first: soup, bread, coffee, laundry detergent. The paint had chipped in places, the chairs didn't match, the floor carried years of scuffed history, but something filled the room that money rarely buys. Children laughed near a bookshelf. An old man played checkers with a volunteer. 2 women folded, donated clothes. Nobody looked important. Everybody looked needed. I stayed near the entrance, head down. Then I saw her. She'd traded the cream dress for a volunteer apron, hair tied back, sneakers borrowed from a locker. Nobody applauded. Nobody thanked her. Nobody even seemed surprised, which meant she belonged here. A gray-haired volunteer carried a tray toward me. "You must be Walter." I nearly froze. "My name." She smiled. Camille said a gentleman might come looking nervous and pretending he wasn't hungry. She called ahead. "Oh, yes." "Asked us to keep an eye on you." A strange pressure built behind my eyes, not pity. Something harder to name because this wasn't spontaneous kindness anymore. This required planning, follow-through, intention. I accepted the soup, not because I was hungry, but because refusing would have insulted people who believed I needed it. I watched Camille from a distance. She moved through the room like she'd done it 1,000 times. She remembered names. She noticed who needed a blanket without being asked. She knelt beside children without checking whether her dress touched the floor. None of it looked staged. She wasn't performing for strangers. She was being someone she'd already been for a long time. An older man beside me leaned in. "You knew, didn't you?" I nodded. He smiled. "Don't worry. Miss Camille scares everybody the first day." "Scares how?" "By remembering your name." He chuckled. "Most people feed you once, so they can feel good about themselves. She keeps coming back." "How long has she been coming here?" He scratched his beard. 4 years, maybe. 4 years. I had known Camille for 2, which meant she'd started long before she ever met me, not for my sake, not for the family name, not for the wedding photographs, because she chose to. The old man kept eating. She helped me find housing, helped my granddaughter get school supplies. He nodded toward her across the room. "Good kid." I swallowed hard. Good kid, 3 simple words, spoken by a man who didn't know who she really was, or maybe knew her better than I did. Across the room, Camille suddenly looked up. Our eyes almost met. I dropped my face too slow. She frowned for a second, like she'd nearly caught something. then walked over carrying another bowl. "You haven't touched much." "I'm fine." "No, you're pretending." I laughed bitterly. "If only you knew." "I've met enough proud people," she said softly. "Hunger isn't always the hardest thing for a person to admit." "What is?" She paused. "That you need someone." The words landed deeper than she could possibly have meant, because I didn't need food. I needed certainty, and certainty was getting harder to swallow by the hour. As she turned away, a small girl tugged at her apron. "Miss Cammy." Camille's whole face lit up. "Hey, June." The girl couldn't have been older than 7. She wrapped both arms around Camille's waist. "You came," I promised. "You missed my drawing yesterday." "I know, I'm sorry. I made another one." She held up a crayon picture, 2 stick figures holding hands under a huge yellow sun, one in a dress, one wearing a crown. Camille laughed. "Who's the king?" June giggled. "You." "I don't help anybody to be a king." She crouched to the girl's height. Helping people doesn't make anyone royalty. June thought about that longer than most adults would have. "It makes you safe." Camille hugged her tightly, and I looked away, because something in that small exchange hurt in a way I hadn't expected. Not because Camille was pretending, because she wasn't. Hours passed. I watched, listened, questioned everything I thought I knew. Then the first real crack appeared. A young volunteer, clipboard in hand, walked straight to Camille. "You need to sign these." She glanced at them. "What are they?" "The monthly deposit," they insisted. "They don't need to know. They already do." He lowered his voice. "The accountant said we have to record where the scholarship money came from." "Scholarship money." My stomach dropped. Camille glanced around before answering. "I'll handle it." She signed the forms and slipped them beneath a folder before anyone else could read them. Too late. I'd already caught one line. "Ford Community Scholars Fund." A cold feeling spread through me. Ford, her family name. Was her charity really funded by the same wealth she claimed not to care about? Or was there something else being kept from everyone, including me? For the first time since walking into Willowbrook, uncertainty crawled back into my chest, not because I believed she was fake, but because I now knew she was hiding something, and I still had no idea why. 2 women near the donation table were folding sheets, when one of them, a heavy-set woman with a name tag reading Loretta, glanced my way and then leaned toward her friend, not bothering to lower her voice much. "That's the one Camille's been asking about all week. Told me to make sure he got seconds if he wanted them." Her friend clicked her tongue. "She does that. Picks one person out of a whole room and worries about them like they're family." Loretta shrugged. "Better than the ones who worry about nobody." I stood there holding an empty bowl, listening to 2 strangers describe a version of Camille I hadn't been allowed to see in 2 years of dinners and galas, and something in my chest twisted tighter with every sentence. Across the room, the old man who'd told me about the 4 years leaned back in his chair and watched Camille kneel beside a boy whose shoelace had come undone. He didn't say anything else to me, but he caught my eye once and nodded slowly, like he already understood something about my situation that I hadn't said out loud. I wondered how many other men had sat in this room, watching this same woman, working out the same impossible math I was working out now, that she was either the most convincing performer either of us had ever met, or she was simply who she appeared to be, and the second option was somehow harder to accept than the first. Before I could ask another question, the gray-haired volunteer returned with a stack of folded towels. "She's at St. Agnes on Thursdays too," she said, catching my eye on Camille across the room. "Reads to the kids on the cancer ward. Has for years." I stared at her. Years? Long before she was engaged to anybody, if that's what you're asking. She said it kindly, without judgment, but it still landed like a stone dropped down a well I hadn't known was there. Every week of my life with Camille had a shape I thought I understood: dinners, galas, weekends at the lake house, 3 fittings for a dress I wasn't allowed to see yet. I had never once heard the words St. Agnes or cancer ward. Not from her. Not from anyone. My phone buzzed in the duffel bag, muffled under the coat. I stepped into the stairwell to answer it, keeping my voice low. It was my closest friend from business school, one of 4 people who knew where I actually was tonight. Camille called Priya, he said, skipping the pleasantries. Priya called me. She asked whether you were planning some kind of test. My grip tightened on the phone. What did you tell her? The truth. That if you start acting strange before a big decision, it's usually because you're terrified. The word hit harder than any accusation could have. Not suspicious, not calculating, terrified. He had known me long enough to know exactly where the fear came from. My mind drifted backward, 9 years, to a woman named Sophia, the daughter of one of my father's business partners, elegant, intelligent, perfect on paper. We'd dated for almost a year, until one evening I overheard her on the phone with her brother. "He'll inherit everything," her brother had laughed. "So you actually love him?" And Sophia had answered, without any hesitation at all, "I'll grow into it." 4 words that ended something inside me, not because she hated me, but because she believed love could be built on convenience the way a company builds a merger. I ended it that night. Months later, she was engaged to another heir. Since then, every expensive smile had carried an invisible question mark. Every declaration of love had arrived with fine print only I could see. "She's not Sophia," he said, like he'd read my silence over the phone line. "I know. Do you?" I didn't answer. He exhaled. "Whatever you're doing out there, Nathaniel, be careful you're not the one who ends up needing forgiveness." I hung up before he could say anything else, because some truths are easier to hear than to hold. The center closed just after 8. Guests trickled out. Volunteers wiped down tables. Camille changed back into her cream dress and gathered her things. I slipped outside before she could see me. Dale pulled the SUV around the corner. "Home?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. Across the street, Camille stood under a lamppost, waiting for a ride, and for a moment, she looked nothing like the confident woman planning a dream wedding. She looked exhausted, lonely. Her phone rang. She answered fast. "No, don't tell Nathaniel." My heart stopped moving. She turned away from the street. "I'll deal with it myself." A pause. "No." Her voice cracked for the first time all day. If he finds out before the wedding she closed her eyes, everything could fall apart. The call ended. I sat frozen in the dark of the SUV. Dale slowly looked back at me. "Sir." Neither of us spoke, because after everything I had watched that day, one impossible truth now sat between us. Camille was hiding something from me, and whatever it was, she believed it could destroy our marriage before it even began. I didn't sleep that night. Dale had driven me not to the penthouse, but to an apartment my company kept for visiting executives, a place only 3 people knew existed. I peeled the fake beard away and stared at the man in the bathroom mirror. Nathaniel Reyes stared back, successful, well-dressed, composed, and somehow the beggar I'd pretended to be looked more honest than he did. There were 23 missed calls on my phone, 7 from Camille, 5 from my father, several from wedding vendors. One voicemail from Camille I didn't play, because if I heard her real voice now, the test would end, and I wasn't ready for it to end. Not after last night. By noon I was Walter again, though the disguise felt heavier this time not because of the clothes, but because now I knew what kind of woman I was testing. Or at least I thought I did. Dale parked several blocks from the botanical gardens where Camille sometimes met her wedding planner. I found her alone on a bench, wedding binder unopened beside her, looking like someone waiting for news she dreaded. An older woman approached, silver hair, simple blue cardigan, and Camille stood and embraced her. The kind of hug that wasn't formal. It was personal. "You look tired," the woman said. "I feel tired. You've been carrying too much. I'll be okay." The woman reached into her handbag and produced a sealed envelope. "I found these. I couldn't throw them away." Camille stared at it like it might catch fire. "I thought they were gone." "What if Nathaniel sees them? He deserves the truth," the woman said gently, but with a conviction that left no room for argument. Camille lowered her eyes. "Maybe." "No, Camille. He absolutely deserves the truth." My pulse quickened. Truth. The word kept following me everywhere I turned. The woman left, and Camille sat alone with the envelope for several minutes without opening it. Why keep something you refuse to look at, unless you already know exactly what's inside? I followed the older woman to a nearby cafe instead, curiosity outweighing caution. She ordered tea, sat by the window, and unfolded a small photograph from her wallet, smiling at it with unmistakable affection. I took the table behind her. The photo showed a teenage Camille standing beside a much younger version of the same woman. Not mother and daughter, the resemblance wasn't there. An aunt, maybe. A man in his 70s joined her. "Priscilla," he said, and she looked up, delighted. "Ray." They hugged warmly. He noticed the photograph. "Thinking about her again?" She nodded. "I'm worried about the wedding." "Why?" "I'm worried she'll keep punishing herself." My whole body went still. Punishing herself. "I've told her 100 times she was only 17, Priscilla said. "I know," Ray answered, "but guilt doesn't care how old you were." Their voices dropped lower. I couldn't catch the next several sentences until one line reached me with terrible clarity. She promised her father. Her father. Camille's father had died when she was 17. Promised him what? I stayed at that cafe long after Priscilla and Ray had left, turning the fragment over and over, trying to force it into some shape that made sense. A waiter refilled my coffee, without looking twice at my disguise, which told me something about how thoroughly I'd disappeared into the part I was playing. Through the window, the boutique district carried on exactly as it had 3 days earlier, oblivious to the fact that somewhere underneath all this wedding planning sat a debt nobody had ever let Camille finish paying. That evening, my closest friend called again, this time reaching my real phone through a distorted voice app I used for business security. "Nathaniel, who's asking?" "Silence then. Nice try. You think I don't recognize your breathing?" I almost laughed despite myself. Only he could identify me by breathing alone. "I need to see you." "I can't. You've disappeared. I'm busy." "No," his voice hardened. "You're hiding." I said nothing. He continued. "Priya called me. She asked a strange question whether you were planning some kind of test." My grip tightened around the phone. "What did you tell her?" "The truth, which is that if Nathaniel starts acting strangely before a big decision, he's usually terrified." I closed my eyes. Terrified. Not suspicious. Not calculating. Terrified. He'd known me long enough to know exactly where distrust like mine came from, and the reminder didn't make it easier to carry. The next afternoon I went back to Willowbrook, not to watch Camille, but to understand her. She wasn't there. A young volunteer recognized me immediately. "Walter. Miss Camille isn't coming today." "Oh?" "She's at the Children's Hospital." "Hospital." My heart skipped. "She volunteers there too?" He looked uncertain whether to answer, then shrugged. "She reads to the kids." "How long has she been doing that?" "Years. Always before I started here. Always. Always before me. Always hidden, not hidden from the world, hidden from me. Why?" I wandered into the small library and found June coloring quietly. She looked up. "Hi, Walter." "Hello. You came back." "I did." She smiled proudly. "I knew you would." "How?" "Miss Cammy said sad people usually come back." I sat beside her. "June, is Miss Cammy happy?" The girl stopped coloring and thought about it far longer than most adults would have. "Sometimes. And the other times?" June looked down at the drawing in her lap. "Sometimes she cries after everybody leaves." My smile disappeared. "Why?" "I don't know. But she always says the child frowned, trying to remember, I hope he never hates me." The room seemed to tilt. "He?" June nodded. "The man she's marrying." I couldn't speak. A child had just unknowingly handed me a piece of Camille's heart. Not confidence, not certainty, fear. The fear that I might one day hate her. But for what? What secret could produce that kind of fear in a woman who spent her days lifting everyone else up before herself? Before I could ask another question, the young volunteer rushed into the library. "June!" Miss Camille called. "She's bringing someone tomorrow." June's face lit up. "Really? A special guest? Who?" She only said he pulled out his phone and read the text aloud. Please tell the children tomorrow will be important. Someone they've wanted to meet for a very long time is finally coming. A strange uneasiness settled over me. Someone the children had wanted to meet. Who? A celebrity, a donor, a relative. Then the answer arrived so suddenly it stole the air from my chest. It couldn't be. There was no way Camille would. I rushed outside and called Dale immediately. I need every schedule Camille has for tomorrow. What's happened? I think I looked back at the shelter, where children were already taping handmade welcome signs to the walls. I think my fiancée has been planning something behind my back for months, and for the first time since this test began, I'm not afraid she'll fail it. I'm afraid I already have. The next morning, Dale entered the apartment carrying coffee and an expression I had never seen on his face before. Pity. I made some calls, he said. You shouldn't have. He exhaled. The children's ward at St. Agnes is expecting a visitor today. My stomach tightened. Who? They don't know. The visitor insisted on staying anonymous. He set a folder on the table. Inside were photographs, not surveillance, event photographs. Children's hospitals, holiday parties, and always Camille. Holding a boy in a superhero cape, reading beside a Christmas tree, sitting on the floor with a teenage girl who had no hair. The dates carved through my chest. 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3, before she'd ever met me. Before my name meant anything in her life. Where did you get these? I asked. Willowbrook. Sometimes people want proof that kindness existed. I looked away. Outside, morning traffic moved with ordinary certainty, while my entire understanding of the woman I planned to marry kept collapsing, or maybe for the first time becoming clear. There's something else, Dale said. I braced myself. What? The Ford Community Scholars Fund. It isn't what you think. I laughed once, bitterly. I don't know what I think anymore. He slid another document across the table. I stared at it, then stared again, because the annual contribution listed under the fund hadn't come from Meredith Ford or from the Ford family estate. It came from one person, every year, the same amount, the same signature. Camille Ford. Personally, that's impossible, I said. She doesn't have that kind of money. Dale shook his head. Apparently she does. The room tilted around me. For 2 years, I'd believed I understood Camille's finances not because I demanded to, but because people preparing for marriage inevitably discuss practical things. She'd always described herself as comfortable, nowhere close to my level. Not poor, not rich, just secure. So where had hundreds of thousands of dollars come from every year? And why hide it from the one person who was supposed to know everything about her? A new possibility crawled into my mind, one I hated myself for even considering. Was this all another performance? Another carefully built image? I pushed back from the table. I need to see her. Dale blinked. As yourself? No. I closed my eyes. Of course not. At 10 o'clock, I stood outside St. Agnes Children's Hospital, wearing the disguise once more. The irony not lost on me, the richer I actually was, the more I had to hide, and the poorer I looked, the more truth people revealed. The lobby buzzed with quiet activity, doctors and parents and volunteers moving past without a glance in my direction. I found the pediatric wing and sat near the elevators, and I waited. At 11:15, Lo arrived. You'll let her alone. Yoon walked beside her, holding her hand tightly, wearing a yellow dress far too formal for a Tuesday. My heart lurched. Why June? Behind them came a small crowd of volunteers carrying boxes wrapped in colorful paper, and children from the ward began gathering in the hallway, excitement crackling through the air. Is he coming? One boy asked. I think so, Camille said. Really? I promised. The boy grinned. You never break promises. The sentence hit me with a strange, private force, because once I would have said the exact same thing about her before fear talked me out of it. I stayed hidden near the end of the corridor as the children kept asking questions. Will he wear the costume? Can we take pictures? Does he know we're waiting? Each question deepened my confusion. A celebrity, an athlete, a movie star. Then June said something that turned my blood to ice. Miss Cammy said he's brave. Camille looked down at her. He is. Even when he's scared, a shadow crossed her face. Especially then, I stopped breathing. No, it couldn't be. Could it? A nurse approached Camille, holding a clipboard. Are you sure about this? She asked quietly. Camille nodded. What if he says no? The question hung in the corridor like smoke. Camille's smile carried something close to heartbreak. Then he says no, and if he never forgives you? The smile disappeared entirely. Then I'll live with that. Forgive you. There it was again, the same fear June had mentioned. The same fear hiding underneath every act of kindness I'd witnessed for 3 days straight. Forgiveness. For what? Before I could move any closer, a hand touched my shoulder from behind. I spun around. Priya. Sunglasses. A raincoat despite the clear sky, and eyes that were looking directly at me, not through me. At me. You really committed to this, she said quietly. Every muscle in my body locked in place. You've mistaken me for someone else. I really haven't. The hallway seemed to fade. The children, the hospital, everything narrowing down to just the two of us and whatever she'd apparently known all along. How long? I asked. Since the coat. My mouth went dry. You told Camille. She laughed, a sound with no amusement in it at all. Do you honestly think I would do that? I didn't answer, because I had assumed exactly that, days ago, without hesitation, because it fit the story I'd already decided to believe about her. Stories are dangerous that way. Once you believe one, every new fact becomes proof. You want to know something funny? Priya said. What? I hated you. That surprised me. You hated me? The billionaire Prince Charming who was going to break her heart. The irony nearly crushed me on the spot. Why would you think that? Because she loved you too much. The words landed like a physical blow. What? She looked away. She spent 2 years bracing herself for the possibility that you'd leave. Leave? She never believed she deserved you. Nothing about that made any sense. Why? Priya's expression shifted, not anger anymore, something closer to grief. You really don't know. My voice came out foreign to my own ears. Know what? Priya opened her mouth and then stopped, because down the corridor, applause suddenly erupted. Children began cheering. Camille turned toward the hospital entrance, and whatever she had been waiting for had finally arrived. Priya grabbed my arm, her fingers trembling. Nathaniel, what if she doesn't tell you herself? She swallowed hard. You'll never forgive yourself for what you've already done. Then she let go of my arm, and I turned toward the entrance just as the doors opened. And the entire hallway erupted at once, and I stood frozen beside the elevator, waiting to see the mysterious guest Camille had spent months preparing to bring home. A man in his early 40s stepped through the doors, not a celebrity, not an athlete, not a politician, just a man in jeans and a navy jacket, wearing the exhausted expression of someone carrying memories heavier than luggage. The children cheered anyway. June ran first. You came. He knelt and hugged her. I promised. My chest tightened at that word again. Promised. Camille was already walking toward him, not with romance, but with relief, the kind people feel when something fragile has survived. Thank you, she said quietly. He smiled. I almost didn't. I know. They stood there a second, looking at each other with the familiarity of people who had shared real pain, and then the man noticed the children waiting and clapped his hands together. Well, who wants to hear an embarrassing story about superheroes? The children screamed in approval, laughter filling the corridor, but I heard none of it, because all I could see was Camille, and all I could think was, who is he? Beside me, Priya whispered. Oh, this is bad. I turned sharply. Who is he? She didn't answer. Who is he? Her eyes closed briefly. The person she's been afraid to tell you about. The floor seemed to disappear beneath me. I looked back at the man, ordinary, kind, tired, and dangerous only because of what he represented. A secret. Her secret. The one she believed would destroy us. For nearly an hour I watched him read stories, play games, laugh with a room full of children who all knew his name, every single one of them, in a way that made it clear this wasn't his first visit. Mr. Owen, tell us the dragon story. Can June win this time? Owen. The name meant nothing to me yet, but the way every child in that room said it easy, familiar, like a word they'd practiced told me this wasn't a first visit and hadn't been for a long time. Finally, the children were led away for lunch, and the hallway emptied. Camille and Owen remained near a window overlooking the city. You didn't have to come, Camille said. Yes, I did, Owen answered gently. She looked down. I'm scared. I know. What if he hates me? There it was again. Hate. Always hate. Always me. Owen sighed. Then he'll be a fool. She laughed, sadly. You haven't met Nathaniel. No, he said, but I've met you. Silence stretched between them before Camille spoke again. I should have told him from the beginning. Why didn't you? The answer came so quietly I almost missed it. Because when someone looks at you the way Nathaniel looks at me, she stopped. Owen waited. You don't want to become the reason that look disappears. My chest hurt, not metaphorically, physically, as if every suspicion I'd carried for days had turned into actual weight pressing against my ribs. Owen reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph. I couldn't see it from where I stood. Camille could. The color drained out of her face. I haven't looked at that in years. Maybe it's time. She took it with shaking hands, and then she started crying, not the dramatic kind. The kind people do when they are finally too tired to keep being strong. Owen hugged her, not like a lover, like family, like someone who had carried the same grief for just as long. And suddenly I hated myself, because I had spent 3 days inventing betrayals when all I had actually been watching was pain. Nathaniel. I turned. Dale had somehow found me. We need to go. Not now, now. Something in his face frightened me. What happened? He lowered his voice. Your father knows. The words hit like ice water. Knows what about the disguise? Impossible. How? I don't know. He glanced around. But he's furious. Of course he was. My father had built an empire on certainty, on image, on absolute control. A billionaire's son pretending to be homeless 9 days before a society wedding wasn't a scandal to him. It was a humiliation. Where is he? Outside. Here. At the hospital. My stomach dropped. Before I could respond, the elevator doors opened, and there he was, my father. 70 years old, impeccably dressed, perfectly composed, the most intimidating man I had ever known. He didn't see me, not immediately. He saw Camille, and he walked straight toward her. The hallway went silent. Miss Ford. He nodded once. Mr. Reyes, she answered. Owen stepped back instinctively, like prey sensing a predator nearby. My father looked around. The children can leave. Nobody moved. A nurse swallowed nervously. Sir, I said leave. The authority in his voice cleared the hallway faster than a fire alarm. Within seconds, only 4 people remained. My father, Camille, Owen, and me, hidden and cowardly, watching. A nurse who had been lingering near the supply closet, restocking gauze she clearly didn't need, finally stepped forward and cleared her throat. I'm going to need everyone to either sit down or lower their voices. This is still a children's ward. It was such an ordinary, procedural sentence dropped into the worst moment of my life that something in the tension briefly cracked. Nobody obeyed her, not really, but the room noticed her anyway. The way you notice the one person in a crisis still doing their actual job. I found out much later that her name was Denise, and that Camille sent her a card every year on the anniversary of that day, thanking her for something she could never properly explain to a stranger. My father faced Camille directly. I've spent 2 days trying to understand why my son disappeared. She went pale. Nathaniel is missing? Interesting, he said, that you didn't already know. She stared at him, and it wasn't a performance, wasn't a lie, genuine fear. Where is he? My father ignored the question entirely. I discovered something much more interesting. He pulled an envelope from his coat, the same kind of envelope Priscilla had handed her in the park. My blood turned cold. You had no right, Owen said, stepping forward. My father silenced him with a single glance. I have every right when someone intends to marry my son while hiding information that could destroy his future. Destroy his future. the exact words Camille had used on the phone the night before. The room seemed to tilt around that phrase, the envelope, the secret, everything converging in one place at once. Camille looked broken, not exposed, not guilty, broken. "Please," she whispered. "My father didn't soften. He never softened. Does Nathaniel know? No. Will you tell him?" Silence. Then the smallest shake of her head. "No." My heart shattered, because after everything, after Willowbrook, after June, after St. Agnes, after the tears in this very corridor, she was still choosing secrecy over me. My father turned away. "Then I will." "No." The word exploded out of her. She rushed forward, and for the first time in my life, I watched someone stand in front of my father without any fear at all. Not because she was fearless, because she was desperate. "Please," she said again. My father studied her. "Why?" And Camille answered with a truth so devastating it stopped the world from turning. "Because if Nathaniel learns what happened that night," her voice broke completely, "he'll discover that his mother died trying to save me." Everything stopped. The air, the hospital, my heartbeat, my thoughts, my mother, dead for 22 years, my mother and Camille. The envelope slipped from my father's hand, photographs spilling across the floor. Old photographs, a car, rain, a bridge, a child, and a woman I would recognize anywhere, my mother. I stepped forward before I even realized I was moving. The fake beard, the torn coat, the lie. All of it fell away, and for the first time since this test began, every person in that hallway turned and looked directly at me. Nobody spoke. The beard hung crooked on my face. Rainwater had loosened the glue hours earlier, and I hadn't noticed, and now none of that mattered either. Camille stared at me, not at the disguise, not at the betrayal of it. At me, at Nathaniel, the man she loved, the man she'd spent 2 years trying to protect from a secret she believed would destroy him. Her face lost every trace of color. Nathaniel, just my name, one word. But I had never heard it sound so full of fear. My father closed his eyes. For the first time in my entire life, my father looked old, not powerful, not intimidating, just old. "You knew," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. He nodded once. "Since yesterday." I looked at Camille. She was crying again. Not because she'd been exposed, but because the man she'd feared disappointing had been standing 3 feet away the entire time, dressed as a beggar, quietly measuring her worth. "What happened?" I asked. Nobody answered. I stepped toward the photographs and picked one up with shaking hands. The date printed in the corner was 22 years old. The year my mother died. It showed a twisted guardrail overlooking a river. I remembered the official story. A rainy night, a traffic accident, my mother's car going over a bridge. No survivors. I had been 12. "What happened?" I asked again. This time Camille answered. "I was there. The room tilted. You." I couldn't finish. She nodded. "I was 17. A child. A child who had somehow existed inside the worst night of my life. My father had been drinking," she said quietly. "We were driving home. Owen moved beside her, not to protect her from me, to support her, because he'd clearly heard this story told before. He lost control of the car. It spun across the bridge." The photograph trembled in my hand. I got out. Her voice broke. "He couldn't." A pause, and then she continued. "The rain was so heavy, I ran onto the road to get help." She closed her eyes, and then your mother stopped. My chest hurt, not because I didn't believe her, because I did, completely, every word. "She pulled over," Camille whispered. "She saw me screaming." A memory surfaced without warning, my mother sitting on the edge of my bed when I was 9 years old. "If someone is in trouble, Nathaniel, you stop. You always stop." I had forgotten that. "She got me away from the car," Camille said, tears streaming freely now, and then she went back. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. She went back for my father. I closed my eyes. Of course she had. Of course my mother had. "The bridge gave way," Camille said, and the words shattered something inside me. The guardrail collapsed, her shoulders shook, and she fell. I looked at the photograph again. The broken bridge, The rain, the impossible, senseless courage. My mother hadn't died in a simple accident. She died saving strangers. She died saving Camille. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" I asked. My father answered. "Because I told them not to." I turned toward him. He had never looked smaller. "I was angry," he said. "At who?" "Everyone." His voice cracked. "The driver, the bridge inspectors, God." He looked at Camille, and especially the girl who survived. Camille lowered her head. A terrible understanding spread through me. "You blamed her." He nodded. "For years. She was 17. I know." "You let her believe she killed my mother." "I know." Each word seemed to cost him something physical. I was grieving. The explanation sounded pathetic even as he said it, because grief explains cruelty. It doesn't excuse it. I looked back at Camille. "How long have you carried this?" She laughed once, through the tears. 22 years. 22 years believing she was responsible for my mother's death, and then falling in love with my mother's son. No wonder she feared I would hate her. No wonder she volunteered at shelters, at hospitals, at every place a person could quietly try to repay a debt no one could ever actually repay. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked softly. She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw no manipulation, no deception, only fear. "Because you love me." The simplicity of the answer destroyed something in my chest. "I knew who you were before we ever met," she said. "What?" "Not because of your money." She smiled, sadly. "Because of your mother." The world shifted again. "I don't understand. I saw your photograph in the newspaper after the funeral. I kept it for years." My mother had saved her life, and somehow that single act had tied our lives together long before either of us knew it. "When I met you at the fundraiser," she said, "I wanted to walk away." Why? Because I was afraid. Of me? Of loving someone whose life I'd already ruined. I couldn't breathe, because while I had spent days testing whether Camille could love a man without wealth, she had spent years terrified that if I ever learned who she really was, I would stop loving her entirely. All this time, all this pain, all this fear, and neither of us had trusted the other enough to simply say the truth out loud. I looked down at my clothes, the fake beard hanging loose, the torn coat, the whole absurd costume. My test suddenly seemed childish, cruel even. I had disguised myself as a beggar because I wanted to know whether Camille could love a man without wealth. Meanwhile, Camille had spent years wondering whether anyone could love a woman carrying guilt too heavy to set down. I walked toward her. She didn't move. "Are you angry?" she whispered. I thought about the question, about the nights I'd spent doubting her, about the strangers who had shown me more kindness than most people I actually knew, about June, about Willowbrook, about the ring she'd removed rather than let it be used as a leash, about my mother stopping her car in the rain because someone needed help. And I understood something, standing there in a hospital hallway with mud still under my fingernails. Love isn't tested when everything is easy. It's tested when fear gives you every reason to run. "I'm angry," I said. Her eyes closed. At myself. Her eyes opened. "I spent days trying to find out whether you were good enough for me." I laughed softly, brokenly. "The whole time, I was trying to become good enough for you." She stared at me, and then she did something I will remember for the rest of my life. She stepped forward not because she had won the test, not because she'd been proven right, not because anything was fixed. She stepped forward because she loved me, and because she was tired of being afraid. So was I. I held her in a hospital corridor in a fake beard and torn boots, while my father, 70 years old and unbending for 2 decades, cried for the first time since my mother's funeral. My father was the one who spoke first, once the hallway had gone quiet again. "I owe you both an apology I should have given 22 years ago." He looked at Camille, and something in his face had finally cracked open. I let my grief decide who deserved blame. "I was wrong. I have been wrong for a very long time." Camille wiped her eyes. "You don't have to." "I do," he said, cutting her off gently. "Your father made a terrible choice that night. You made none. You were a child on a bridge in the rain, and somehow you've spent every year since trying to earn back a debt that was never yours to owe." He turned to me. "Nathaniel, whatever test you were running out there, it's over." She passed it before either of you knew it had started. Owen excused himself quietly not long after, promising June a rematch at the Dragon Story before he left, and I understood, finally, why he'd stayed close to Camille all these years, not as a rival, not as a secret, but as the one person who had witnessed her grief up close and refused to let her carry it entirely alone. He shook my hand at the elevator. "Take care of her," he said. "She spent longer taking care of everyone else than anyone should have to." I told him I would, and I meant it. We left the hospital together that afternoon, Camille still in her cream dress, me still half in disguise, and somewhere between the parking garage and the SUV, I finally pulled off the ruined boots and threw them in a dumpster, because I never wanted to see them again, and because some tests, once finished, deserved to be discarded entirely. The wedding almost didn't happen, not because either of us wanted to call it off, but because for 3 days we barely left each other's side long enough to plan anything at all. Meredith called twice, demanding an explanation for the scene at the hospital, and Camille, for the first time in her adult life, let the call go to voicemail without a flicker of guilt. Priya showed up at the apartment the next morning with coffee and an apology that neither of us had asked for. "I should have told you what I actually thought," she said, "instead of assuming you already knew." "You were protecting her," I said. "I was scared for her," Priya corrected. "There's a difference. I just didn't know how to do it without sounding cruel." I told her she hadn't sounded cruel. She'd sounded like someone who loved her friend enough to be honest, which was more than I'd managed for most of that week. Meredith came to the apartment a week after the hospital, alone, without warning, and stood in the doorway for a long moment before she said anything at all. "I'm not going to apologize for wanting to protect this family's name," she said. "I raised Camille to survive rooms that would have swallowed her whole otherwise." "I know," I said. "But you should also know," she went on, quieter now, "that I never knew about the accident. Not the whole truth of it. Her father died believing it was simply weather and bad luck, and I let myself believe the same thing because it was easier than asking my 17-year-old daughter to relive the worst night of her life for my benefit." She looked past me, toward the hallway where Camille was pretending not to listen. "I have not been the mother she needed. I would like the chance to be a better one, if she'll allow it." It wasn't a full reckoning, and it wasn't the kind of apology that erases 22 years of distance in a single afternoon, but Camille came out from the hallway and hugged her mother anyway, and I understood that some doors only need to be opened a crack before people find their own way through. 3 months later, we were married. Not in the Brown Palace ballroom, not under gold chandeliers and 300 curated guests, at Willowbrook. June carried the flowers, solemn and thrilled in equal measure, refusing to let anyone else hold the basket. The shelter choir sang, off-key in places and better for it. Owen gave a short, unpolished reading about a bridge, a river, and a debt that had finally been allowed to close. My father stood at the front and told every guest the truth about my mother, not the sanitized version printed in the paper 22 years earlier, but the whole of it, including his own failure afterward, and by the time he sat down, there wasn't a dry eye left in the room, including his own. Afterward, he shook hands with every volunteer he could find, asked Loretta twice how long she'd been running the kitchen, and by the end of the reception, had quietly arranged to fund a new wing at Willowbrook without telling either of us until the paperwork was already signed. "Your mother would have liked this place," he said, when I finally caught him near the drink table. "More than she would have liked the ballroom." I told him I thought so too. June fell asleep in a folding chair before the cake was cut, still wearing her flower girl dress, and Camille carried her to a quiet corner rather than wake her, tucking a borrowed jacket around her shoulders the way she must have done 100 times before I ever knew this part of her life existed. Priya caught the bouquet, mostly by accident, and pretended to be embarrassed about it in a way that fooled absolutely nobody. When the ceremony ended, Camille took my hand and said the words that finally made everything make sense. "Your mother saved my life." I smiled. "No," I said, looking around at the room, at the children, at my father, at the woman I loved standing in a dress far simpler than the one she'd once planned to wear. "She saved mine, too." And somewhere in the middle of that ordinary, unglamorous room full of second-hand folding chairs and donated centerpieces, I finally understood the thing my mother had tried to teach me years before she died, and the thing fear had nearly cost me the chance to learn twice. The greatest tragedy isn't loving the wrong person. It's letting fear convince you to doubt the right one. I keep thinking about Camille sitting on that pavement in her wedding dress, in front of everyone, refusing to get up, not because it was dramatic, because it wasn't. Really, it was just quiet and stubborn and completely her. What gets me is that she was already carrying the heaviest secret in the whole story, and the version of her we saw that day, kneeling next to a stranger, was the truest one the entire time. Would you have told the truth sooner if you were her, or would 22 years of silence have felt safer too? I go back and forth on it every time I think about this one. If this story stuck with you the way it stuck with me, I'd genuinely love to hear your take in the comments below.